Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to our webcast, Modern Core Banking Debunked. This webcast is part of a thought leadership program, Rethinking, produced by Thought Machine. Through this program, we often bring to you a variety of topics facing banks' modernization efforts in today's world, often with the help of our clients, partners, and subject matter experts. I'm Robin Zhang, Global Marketing Director at Thought Machine. It is an honor that I will serve as your moderator for today's session and especially be joined by an amazing panel of industry leaders. Before I start, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items. We will be taking questions throughout the survey, throughout the webcast, and please use the Q&A window on your online dashboard, and we will do our very best to address all of your questions. In any event we run out of time, we will follow up accordingly. And the replay will be available on our Rethinking website at thoughtmachine.net/rethinking. This is also the site that you will find scheduled for future webcasts, as well as other relevant and interesting thought leadership assets. Finally, your feedback is very important to us. At the very end of the webcast, we'd very much appreciate if you can stay on for a few seconds for a very brief survey. Your feedback will be important as we continue to strive to improve and bring to you thought-provoking topics in the future. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's panel. Unfortunately, we have a little bit technology a glitch, so we won't be able to have the honor to see Laura Merling, Chief Transformation and Operations Officer, Arvis, on the video. But nonetheless, we will hear from her, and I know she has great stories to share with us. And we have Emily Heffelman, Digital Banking Core Modernization Leader from Accenture, joining us as well. And we also have Emmanuel Voitidis, Head of Sales Engineering from Thought Machine. Now, I'd like to go around and ask each of the panelists to give a very brief self-introduction. Laura, if you don't mind, can I start with you?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for the invitation. Excited to be here and have the conversation today. Just a little bit of background. Long time in the software and technology industry, and then shifted over to industry to leverage that experience and help with transformation at global companies from AT&T to Ford and United Technologies Aerospace. Spent some time at Google working on transformation there, and now at Arvis Bank. So I'm very excited about it.
Thank you, Laura. It's great to have you. I'm sorry we couldn't get the technology to work today. Emily, can I pass it to you?
Great. Thank you, Robin. Good morning. Thank you also for having me. Excited to be here with this group. I lead our digital banking core modernization practice here in North America. So I help institutions focus on the selection, adoption, and implementation of next generation cores, just like Thought Machine, and spend a lot of my time with you guys, which is great as we see you continue to lead in industry. I've been at Accenture for 12 years and continue to lead in the space. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Emmanuel?
Thank you, Robin. Good morning, everyone, and it's great to be here. I am heading the sales engineering team for the Americas in Thought Machine. So in that capacity, we have great opportunities to work with clients and guide them through the sales process and beyond, from a technical and functional perspective. I started working with Thought Machine almost 3 years ago in Europe and across EMEA. And before that, I was working with other vendors in the core banking, but also in the digital channels and digital front office space.
Thank you all. Thanks, Laura, Emily, and Emmanuel. Great to have you all today. We started this webcast series in July last year. At the very beginning, we had a mini series delving into the various technology aspects of modern core systems. We went through what is a cloud nativeness, and we talked about real-time data. We also delved into the architecture design of modern core systems. And over the last several months, we moved on to talk about the delivery of a modern customer experience, essentially talk about how banks can drive business benefits using modern core systems to increase customer satisfaction and also deliver innovative products and services. But over the course of that time, we continue to get requests from our audience wanting to learn more about modern core. Some are asking to understand more about the differences between the various modern core systems in the market. And some are simply asking for advice for migration approaches. And some are also sharing with us the challenges they have encountered along the way in their core modernization efforts and asking for experiences to learn from others who have been on this journey or are on this journey. So that today we're exactly doing that. In responding to these requests, we have assembled this amazing panel, as you could hear from the introduction of Laura, Emily, and Emmanuel. All of them have extensive experience working on banking modernization and also core modernization, and yet each of them have their own unique disciplinary focus, whether it's strategy, implementation, or technology. So I'm really excited, and I'd like to kick off today's discussion with the first topic, the first question for the panel, the evolution of core banking systems. So Emmanuel, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you, right? Because you have been working with various core systems for a very long time. To help level set today's discussions, would you kindly share with us what are some of the key functionalities that our banks, as they shop for a new modern core, what they should be looking at, and how are these functionalities differentiate them? How are they different from the legacy core systems?
Yes, absolutely. So, to be honest, legacy core systems have a long history, right, and a long evolution. So we started with first generation, which are basically mainframe-based systems, and then you continue with second generation as ATMs came forward, and then we have third generation systems that were more focused on the consumer and on being 24/7 in certain cases. Now, the main common characteristic of all legacy systems is lack of flexibility. This derives first and foremost from the technology, the fact that we are talking mostly about monoliths, non-cloud-based architectures. But this, of course, extends to the functionality that can be offered. Right? It extends to the way data is being streamed. It extends to the scalability. So it has great business implications. Now, on the opposite side, of course, we have fourth generation core banking systems that have certain kind of distinct characteristics. Again, they cover a broad range. But the main characteristics are cloud nativeness. So a system that was not just cloud-enabled, but actually was developed from the beginning to operate in the cloud and leverage the characteristics of the different cloud platforms. The other key characteristic is effortless access to data. So streaming APIs, event-driven architecture. A third characteristic is configurability. Having a universal product engine, having the ability to give ownership to the bank, to the financial institution, when it comes to anything that relates to configuration, right? And independence from the vendor, of course. And another common pattern is that there is this trend of going towards a headless core because the ecosystem of a bank is becoming more and more complex, and more vendors are trying to enable basically clients to leverage this ecosystem of best-of-breed solutions.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Laura, I know Arvis recently embarked on its own core transformation program, and you're very much the front and center of it. Would you kindly share with us, what in the first place drove Arvis to take on this rather significant transformative project in the first place?
Yeah, I think that effort started well before I got here. It was a couple of years in the making, and I think part of what came to reality here is when you think about, right, the bank is 60 years old. We've been through, even though we're a 4-state community bank, we've been through lots of acquisitions and mergers over that history, and you collect technology, right? And that technology, some pieces become easier or harder, should I say, to change over time. And I think we got to a point a few years ago, the team here, the CIO, Jim Cole, and some others, Angie Garrett and others, all created, they stepped back and said, look, if we really want to be progressive and we want to compete with, the burgeoning fintech market that started a few years back, we've got to have a modern core. And in order to do that, we need to rethink what we're doing and how do we step back and do that. And so a lot of it was just from, hey, we need to move to something modern, scalable, adaptable, plug and play. As other types of technology platforms come in and out of fashion, we need to be able to be nimble and switch that infrastructure as it happens. And so a lot of it just started with where we were and where we needed to go. It's up to us and the team here to make sure that we're around for the next 60 years. And we can't do that living on a historical core infrastructure. I think a lot of it was also, we were reaching capacity where we were in our data center and how it was set up and where we were living, and being able to shift to the cloud was a key component of that. We can't get the scale that we want and provide the services and customer experience we want in the current environment. It's just not flexible.
Thank you, Laura. And I have some questions from the audience, but before I go there, I'd like to come to you, Emily, because you have been consulting with various banks for a very long time, especially on their focusing on the core modernization efforts. And I'm sure you have, during that course, you have exposed to various modern core systems, right? So what advice do you typically give it to your clients, or what are some of the key characteristics that you often ask them to look for to identify the real best long-term solution for them in terms of the modern core?
Thanks, Robin. So, I think definitely there are differences as we think about the different modern cores that are in the market today. Some have integrated workflows, or, they come with a customer file or customer master. Others have pre-integrated components. But truly when looking at selecting the core, I think it all comes down to just what Laura was describing, which is the bank's North Star vision. So what's the goal of the institution? What kind of bank do they want to be when they transform? Is it looking at prep for M&A? Is it reaching a new target or launching a new brand? And then truly, once that vision is established, we like to use a set of criteria we call critical to quality factors. And those really help us to narrow down what 2 to 3 cores would really be a nice fit, similar to what Emmanuel was just talking about, looking at criteria like being cloud native or flexible or allowing scalability, being open API enabled, enabling real-time data, and is it a cultural fit, right? So not every core is for every bank, and so it's really important, and I know we'll talk about that in a bit, but it's important to think about that as well. And truly, when shopping for a core, it's about selecting the core that's going to meet your needs, not just for today and the short term, but as you as an organization continue to evolve and grow, which is why many institutions like Arvest, and as Laura just described, are really interested in these flexible cores like that mission.
Thank you. I think what you have just shared with us, Emily, seems very much what Laura has also described with us, right? Looking for something that will, I think, was that 15 years or 20 years, what Laura just said. That's very interesting. I do have a question from the audience, and I'm just going to put it out there because, Laura, I know you cannot see, so feel free to jump in, raise your hand, or Emily and Emmanuel as well. The question is, where does defactoring legacy core from COBOL to microservices fit into the modern marketplace? Who's taking this? Emmanuel?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm happy to take it. So I would say that basically the mainframes have served their purpose fairly well. Right? it is clear that for many years and decades, even clients were fairly happy. Truth is, though, that there are many issues that come with that at present time. It is by now fairly clear that cloud technologies are the way forward. On top of that, when it comes to mainframe, it is a technology for which it is very hard nowadays to find resources. And the other key item is that they don't basically give you very easy access to the data. And this is key if you want to know your customer better, if you want to provide kind of a more contextual banking experience effectively. So in that sense, I think it is clear nowadays that moving to the cloud is a necessity. Now, obviously, these two approaches are distinctly different, and there are different migration strategies that are being involved to kind of mitigate that risk in the best way possible. Right? We have scenarios where the two systems coexist in order to ease that approach and ensure that we mitigate the risk as much as possible. So I would say that the road to cloud is the only way forward. The question is when, and this, of course, needs to be answered by each type of institution individually, right? But the rule of thumb would definitely be it's better sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Maybe I think we're having some feedback. People can't hear you very well, so let's switch a little bit.
Yeah, talking to the same laptop.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so and now we talked about. Thank you for Laura, Emily, and Emmanuel to really level set this for us, understanding really the key benefits from the technology of the modern core can deliver. Now, I'd like to pivot a little bit, talk about the migration approach, right? So I assume this is like everything else in life. There's no one size fits all. If a bank wants to get on the core modernization efforts, what is the right migration approaches? And Emmanuel, maybe I can start with you. Can you share with us the various migration paths that you have observed from banks that you have worked with?
Yes, absolutely. So for quite a long time, big bang was the main approach. Now, the main issue with that approach is that it is a very high-risk approach. So you load the data and you go live as part of a single migration event, right? That means much lower complexity from an architectural standpoint and substantially higher risk. I think due to the fact that there were in past years many failed migrations with legacy cores, most institutions are coming to the realization that reducing risk is a fair trade-off when it comes to increasing somewhat architectural complexity. So that brings us to new approaches that are becoming more and more relevant. One approach is, of course, doing a phased migration, in which case you basically have different data tranches and you migrate based on a particular unit of migration of your choice. It can be product-based, customer-based, etc. That means you have multiple migrations over time, but you also manage to spread the risk in that regard. Another approach that we are seeing more and more is having a parallel run, kind of a coexistence scenario, right? Where you have the modern core running in parallel to the legacy core, and you gradually basically migrate the data, and you ensure through reconciliation processes that everything is synchronized. The great benefit with this approach is that you have the opportunity to familiarize with the new core, work with it over a period of months, right? And that drastically reduces complexity and even addresses some of the cultural impact that Emily mentioned before. Then again, there are other strategies. One common approach, and this is more of a business decision, is that you go with a new product, you offer the new product to your customers in an entirely new core, and you incentivize basically existing customers to migrate to the new product in the new core banking system.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Laura, would you mind sharing with us, now you have been on that journey, like what migration approach have you chosen for Arvest, and what are some of the key considerations behind that determination this is a right migration path for you, Laura?
Yeah, happy to share. It's definitely been a journey, and it's had different twists and turns. But I'd say, part of our path has been, I go back to something that Emily mentioned earlier, which is, what's our North Star? Where are we going, right? You want to figure out your modernization based upon where you're going, right? There are different cores designed for different things, or they focus on different areas to start with. We started down the path of deposits as our first product. And I think I mentioned to you when we were talking, right, that we had switched to loans. So it's kind of figuring out, where are you going? What's that priority in that journey? And then you have to think about things like, are you going to do net new only, or are you going to actually migrate? So are you going to migrate customers, or are you going to do net new and then think about migration later? And then it's centering it around the use cases. So it's, what's our North Star? What's our roadmap to get there? What are the use cases that we want to start with, which goes to net new versus migration? And then a lot of it was about data and thinking about where the data gets stored versus where you might store it in a traditional core versus how I'm going to store it in a cloud-based, cloud-native core that's just all net new. So I think part of it for us has been this journey along the path of, where do we want to go? How do we want to get there? And we have made a few changes along the way, but it's based upon starting with where our strengths are and where we wanted to head as a company and as an entity. So that's really kind of the baseline for us is starting with that priority and a set of use cases.
Thank you, Laura. Emily, based on what we just heard from Laura, do you have anything else you would like to add, or even to emphasize for our audience based on your consulting experience?
Sure, thanks, Robin. So, when I think about these, we call them archetypes. When we think about archetypes or different types of change, as you think about migration, other than some of the pieces that I heard, I would talk about the ecosystem in general. So when you're thinking about which path you want to choose and how you want to migrate, that ecosystem is so key as we think about these thinner cores. Really it translates to, the larger the ecosystem, the greater the responsibility that's going to land on you as an institution to either rely on vendors or systems integration partners to really complete your banking solution. So it's something to think about, not just from a vision perspective, but also as your organization continues to transform. And then I'd also say, how much technology do you want to bring in-house, or how many resources do you want to think about needing, right? Again, that goes back to that ecosystem piece. And based on the path that you choose, should you decide to do a coexistence method, then you might not have as much of a taxing effort as you would as if it was full migration. Again, there's trade-offs. You could be in a scenario where you have to run 2 cores in parallel. What does that look like? How do you think through that? I think a lot of the institutions that are adopting Thought Machine and similar cores are thinking about that as well and trying to solve for it. And really, how much time do you have? Do you want to get something out to market that's a new product in a new niche and get it out quickly because you can see the market going there? And if so, then do you want to give yourself a 9-month timeline, or do you have the luxury of 18 to 24 months? So those are some of the things that, I think about adding.
Thank you, Emily. I think you just raised a few things from organizational talent, as well as, partnership integration perspective that I'd like to delve into, which will pivot into the next later 2 sections very well. But before I move on, I'd like to come back with the audience question. I think this is probably more geared for you, Laura. The question is, one of the biggest challenges in historical data is historical data migration. Can you shed some light on this? I assume the audience is like to learn a little bit more about your experience on this data migration from you, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, so again, part of that thought process, right, has been stepping back and saying, okay, we're not just building a new core banking platform, we're actually also building a new data platform in parallel. And then it's figuring out as we do. I'm going to call it migration, but it's probably not a migration, right? We've chosen to start with net new customers as a starting point versus migrating. And the reason for that is there's some complexity in migrating, especially if you're starting with loans, right? We have several, just like every bank has a variety of loan types and how those loans are calculated and what you think about them. And so how do we get down to a very simple set base starting point? And it has taken the team a tremendous amount of work to work through what we were going to do, how we do it, how we get to a narrow enough scope to test it and try it. And again, it was looking at the complexity of if we tried to take something that was existing versus starting with a net new customer and migrate them over, it was going to take us longer to get there. And so one piece of it was, that's why we started with net new, but it had to do with complexity of how loans were designed and calculated and everything else. And that's with lending. Like deposits might be easier, but we started in a different place, right? I think another aspect of this, as you're thinking about it, is on the data platform. Our big question and an ongoing debate, I would say, I think we've gotten to an answer, but you know, we continue to ask ourselves it again every day, is with a traditional core banking infrastructure, you store a lot of that data with the core, right? And you store it with the systems that it came out of in the individual systems. We're trying to create a data platform so that we have everything from real-time data and data flows, information that we can use, not just at rest, but we want to be able to be responsive and use artificial intelligence and machine learning at the point of interaction with the customer. In order to be able to do those things, you've got to think about where you need to store the data, when and how, and it's a very thoughtful process based on the type of data, based on the use cases that you're walking through, and where you want to invoke interactions and responses. And so I think for us, that's been a lot of the learning is where does that data get stored as well? Because you still might want to store some with your new core, with the modern core, but it's things that you want to access at a given point in time and the availability of it. So again, it's up to you. You're going to have to decide yourself, but it's really thinking through those use cases. We know that everything's still going to get stored in our data platform, but there are things that we also want stored in the core.
Thank you, Laura. It seems like our conversation right now naturally is moving to the next section of our intended discussion for today, is that some of our organizational challenges, right? Any transformative projects ultimately have a broader organizational impact, even those are sounds like technology focused, like migration to a new core. So I'm going to come back to start maybe with you, Emily, because you kind of were already leading towards that. Maybe even I start with audience questions. Emily, there seems to be, I'm reading a question now, there seems to be a lot of development required for cloud native core banking, back office, functional general ledger. I'm a big believer in microservices, but our shop is strapped for resources to develop some of the services required to enable our end user. My take is, the question is, what are some of the vices to help addressing these talent resource challenges? Emily?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, thanks, Robin. That's a great question. So, I think a couple of things. So being strapped for resources can be solved in a couple of different ways, but again, also comes back to the vision. What is it that you want to enable? And if it means that you have to have a change to your technology or your business side from a strategic standpoint, then we need to think about how best to do that. Is it supplementing with a vendor, provider, an SI, systems integrator, for example? Is it potentially upskilling or reskilling your existing organization? We're working on a point of view right now at Accenture around this very topic, which is how can we create an operating model that really reflects the way you'll work once Thought Machine is implemented, right? So let's ensure we're looking at the adoption of Thought Machine in the right way, and you're harnessing the right pieces of it to make it be as effective as possible. So thinking about being very product centric and agile in nature, and really harnessing that operating model. And then also to the skilling point, how do you upskill or create a rigorous program in which you understand where the talent gaps potentially are within your existing organization, and then taking the right steps to get to the new? Is it upskilling? Is it fulfilling with new talent as well, and sort of creating that culmination of the right balance? And then ultimately, we really need to think as the adoption of next generation cores is around defining this culture and your purpose, and making sure that, again, it's aligned back to that vision. I'm harping on it because it's so important. But, we take all of those pieces of transformation from both the business and the technology side. Again, this is a decision that needs to be made on both sides. And you want to wrap that with the cultural DNA of your organization. And I think, Laura and team, you've done an excellent job into weaving change and transformation as a key pillar at Arvest. And I think that's so key of what you need to do in order to be successful with such adoption.
That's great. Now let's pass it to Laura. Let's hear from Laura. Laura, what are some of the biggest challenges you have encountered so far? Would you mind sharing with us?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges probably aren't different than what anybody else would experience in any kind of transformation, right, or business transformation. There's more broadly, the company is going through a broader transformation around, where do we want to be in the future? Who do we want to be? How do we want to run the business? How do we think about things that we did manually? How do we think about automation? How do we think about using machine learning and AI? How do we think about data at the core? But all that requires something that started a few years ago with our CEO, which was around this Drive Change survey. And it was getting an understanding around the readiness of the organization overall for transformation. And that was kind of the framework and starting point. And it's a survey that we do every year. And we've been doing it in partnership with Accenture. And so how do we leverage that Drive Change survey? And then the second part of it was, as we start to go into this, I think, we talked about, so using a new core means I went from maybe using the legacy systems maybe weren't designed with a microservices architecture or API architecture. There are other skills. I need to learn to use cloud computing skills. I need to think about how to design something for cloud scale. Those things differ. And so, if we want to upskill everybody, so one of the things that we've done is we started on a journey. One of the very first things we did a couple months back was do a whole skill assessment of what are the skills that we need for the future state within our technology organization. And based on that, what are some of the key role profiles that we need? And so we did this massive skills assessment, which then led us to create a set of learning journeys for associates based upon who would be getting to the core first, both the core as well as the data platform and cloud infrastructure and cloud foundation. And so that upskilling and reskilling piece that Emily talked about is foundational. Now, are you going to be able to upskill and reskill everybody immediately to be able to start making that shift? No. So we've also blended in some new skills, and it's important to blend the new skills with the folks that have been here for a long time. They know, the team here knows that Bennett Arvest knows where the data sits, knows how to integrate to our GL, knows they have a lot of knowledge and information that helps. And so it's finding the right balance of the team and the team structure to get us from where we were to where we're trying to get to. And it's really been hugely valuable for us to marry that up, right? And so, we have, there's things like who is leading our we'll call it our WCF kind of communication model and interaction model, and now we need to go to microservices. Okay, do we take some folks from there and bring them over? Do we take some folks that were working on our existing core data infrastructure and move a couple over, but not all at once? And I say move them over to get them to start working on the core, use their knowledge and learn side by side, with ourselves, our cloud vendor, the other folks that are working on the technology stack, and then use that as a knowledge transfer and sort of a bridge. And so our enterprise architecture team has been a great partner in that, as well as the CIO organization. So we're really marrying the best of both worlds to get there, but it's a journey, right? It's not going to happen overnight.
Absolutely. I'm so intrigued by all that due diligence efforts almost, right? You're doing, whether it's a survey, whether it's a skill set assessment. I'm particularly intrigued because I was going to ask you a question of any challenges you have encountered caught you by surprise, but now you're saying this, I guess I'm almost retweaking my question to say, all those due diligence efforts you're putting in, Laura, have they helped you to greatly eliminate any surprises along the way?
No. Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to think about where, to eliminate surprises. I think as you go along the journey, right, and you're thinking about what you're doing, you learn things along the way of, it goes back to another thing that Emily mentioned, which is what's your time horizon, right? So we set a very aggressive, tight timeline and schedule of which we wanted to have our first customers up and running on our new core banking platform. And so in order to do that, we needed to really narrow down the scope. But then it comes to deciding, okay, what things do we want to integrate with? Do we want to go integrate with a net new, like payments? Do we want to go integrate with a net new payments platform? Do we want to integrate with something we already have? Which one's quicker and easier? Which one comes out of the box? So there's lots of things to go look at and evaluate along the way, but knowing what skills we have gave us the foundation to make some of those decisions and choices maybe a little easier, right? And when we have to get down to saying, okay, we're trying to hit this time frame, this might not be the long-term answer, but it gets us out the door for the time frame that we're targeting. So we're trying to think a little bit more like a startup internally in terms of, okay, we want to it's about the date and the time and making sure that things are functioning correctly. So it's not without the due diligence, compliance, or regulatory, but we want to get it going, because until we put it in production, we don't actually know, right, how it's all going to work. We think we do, but we want to get it in production. So that's what's been key for us.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Now, I'd like to also ask this question from a different angle for Emmanuel, right? As you have heard, Laura and Emily shared with us the challenges, organizational challenges they have encountered, how they addressed it. They are already on the core modernization efforts. Emmanuel, I assume in your role, there's also a lot in the front end, even convincing the banks that they, in the first place, they need to modernize their core. So where do you normally get most of the resistance from? Whether it's a type of resistance or the part of the organization, whether it's technology, product, business, procurement, finance, and what typically do you have to do to turn them around for them to realize, like what Laura and Emily both said earlier, if you want to be in a business 15, 25 years from now, you have to do it. So how do you turn them around, and where are the typical resistance coming from?
Yes, absolutely. Just to set the scene, right? I would totally agree with Laura and Emily that there are very real challenges that are technical, logistical, and also cultural. Now, when it comes to the technical challenges involved, it is the case that most of the technologies we are talking about now, most of the technologies and technical characteristics that make a core next generation have been already attained a great level of maturity. So most of the concerns that we faced in the early days of cloud adoption for financial institutions are no longer relevant. Now, from a logistics perspective, there is also a strong argument in favor of cloud adoption. So having an open source stack, having a cloud native stack versus basically a stack that is proprietary or based on very old technologies means that you can very easily attract talent. So from a logistics perspective, it is definitely the way to go. Now, the final challenge is the culture, right? And that brings me to where we face most resistance. So usually usually the technology departments of the different financial institutions are quite ready to jump on board. Right? They may be familiar with the legacy technology, but nonetheless they understand the necessity to move on. When it comes to departments that have less visibility on technology and discipline implications, this is obviously and naturally a hard sell. So quite frequently we are leaning on our technology counterparts, basically within the organization, to provide that comfort, right, and explain how things will work out and debunk some myths around technology. But then again, what we have seen is that when we are past the initial stage, familiarizing with the new technologies, the operations departments, back office, product management, etc., usually jump on board. And there has been always positive feedback and positive reaction, especially when replacing the most cumbersome legacy processes that were in place.
Thank you, Emmanuel. What you said, there's one point it really resonated with. About, I think, 2-3 months ago, we had a CEO of Mascoma Bank, and Clay Adam. He said something. A lot of times people complain about it's hard to find talent to handle modern technology, but people often fail to think from the other side of the coin is that if you adopt modern technology, actually makes it easier for you to get good talent. So I think that very much aligned with what you just said. I thought it was very interesting. I feel this is a subject we can go on really forever. In the interest of time, I like to move on a little bit. So far, our conversation has been very much around core modernization. And I'd like to broaden our discussion a little bit to the broader banking ecosystem, kind of something very much Emily alluded to in the beginning, right? Core system is not the only system. To run a bank, there are many, many banking systems in that. Whether it's through partnership, whether it's a self-built system. So, Laura, I'd like to get your thoughts, right? As you're moving finally to a modern core, what are you doing with other legacy systems like CRM systems, ERP systems? Are you updating them all at once, or are you also working on the integration with those existing or legacy systems with your modern core? And how easy or difficult is that integration experience for you?
All of the above. We have something that we are going to do net new, and we're working towards that. We have other things that we're expanding how it gets used. Other things we will integrate into legacy, and it's really been, again, a thoughtful approach. One of the first things that the team did back probably, in the fall, took, 12, 14 weeks, but did entire technology assessment. What is all of our back office infrastructure? What do we have? What do we want to leverage? What do we want to expire? In parallel to that, we then also created our cloud migration strategy relative to what things we wanted to leverage first as part of that move forward and move to a new core banking platform. And so there's been a lot of moving pieces to orchestrate at any given time. And so it's really taking the pieces of the puzzle to work that out and determine it. I think, so like I said, some it's just been let's go net new, and some it's been a decision process based on what we want to be part of our future state. So it was, where are we going? A combination of what do we have and what do we think is in it for the long haul. So it's taken us quite a bit of time, and there are still some decisions that haven't been made. So we're taking it as they come. Again, not losing focus on we have a deliverable we want to meet, and we're not going to figure out all of the end state, where we're going to be on everything for the end state today. We're going to figure out the pieces as we're moving along the journey, because if we try to do it all up front and then not be flexible along the way, we could put ourselves into a box, right? So part of it is getting things out in small incremental batches, learning, and then making the adjustments accordingly. Obviously, we have to have the first phases identified of what we're trying to do for rolling this out, but not everything all at once.
Thank you, Laura. Emily, since you actually already kind of took us there, and I know you also have been working in a white paper very much talking about the experience of core modernization. Would love to get your thoughts, whether it's some key points from the white paper or additional thoughts in terms of working with a broader banking ecosystem. So I'll pass the mic to you, Emily.
Great, thank you. I think, as Laura was speaking, actually, I just jotted down, I liked how you summarized it, Laura. Where are you going? What do you have? And then within it for the long haul. And the point I think I want to make too is around that long haul piece. If you think about what are the systems you have in place that are core, for lack of a better word, to your competitive advantage, or what is a key piece to the DNA of your organization and who you are and what makes your bank your bank. And, those could be things like your servicing. Maybe it works really well and you have high satisfaction scores and you don't want to change that. Or perhaps it's your channel approach and how you connect. And so you want to keep those and maybe evolve them over time. But it's important to think about, again, I go back to the idea of harnessing, the key pieces of Thought Machine. How do you make sure that the pieces of your ecosystem allow you to enable real-time data? That it's not just sitting there in your data platform or sitting there in your data store. So it's thinking about, what's in it for the long haul. How do you take the opportunity to then take the technology and make your ecosystem future proof, right? Or future ready. And I think there are economies of scale that can come from that. But again, you have to be very mindful, to Laura's point, right, of how you do it, and not too much too fast, and make sure that it's at the right pace of change for your organization.
Thank you. Emmanuel, definitely want to come to you to get your thoughts on this topic from a technology perspective. But I think this audience question maybe is better for you, so, and it's very relevant. So I'm gonna read the audience question here, Emmanuel. The biggest challenge is requirements finalization. How does Thought Machine do it? Does it have out-of-box functionality that can be plugged and played, or more client-driven development?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So usually when we are presenting the platform, right, and talking about technology, the feedback is positive, but then again the question comes, okay, but now how do we implement it, right? How do you make it part of our ecosystem? Now, I will echo Laura and Emily, right, and say that an incremental approach is always the preferred approach, should always be the preferred approach, right? Now, when it comes to specifically finalizing requirements, this is something that by default has to take into account the client's, the financial institution's specific circumstances, and at the same time, it has to take into account the technology of the platform that you want to adopt. Right? So it is by default a process that requires the technology vendor, or vendors for that matter, and the client to come together and decide how to basically structure these requirements and what is the best way to implement basically the technology available to optimally cover the requirements. In Thought Machine, we always favor an approach where we start to work with the client and give access to the system as early as possible. So we are always very happy to give hands-on access on the technology and start working hands-on with the client, almost in a mini implementation mode, even during the early stages of the sales process. That means that by the time we have decided on what the requirements are, product-wise, technology-wise, architecture-wise, everybody is up to speed. We have been working together for quite some time. They know our product, we know the requirements, and we know how we can work together to implement it.
Thank you. I can't believe we only have a few minutes left. So with the remaining time left, I like to, what I usually do is do a lightning round, go around a panelist. And the question I have is, today we talk about banking modernization and specifically core modernization. In this final minutes for each of the panelists, if there's one piece of advice that you will leave for our audience, I assume many are either on that journey or about to explore and to embark on that journey. What is that piece of advice you would like to give to our audience? And Laura, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
No, I don't mind. I would say, right, it's a journey. So no decision is wrong. It's about how you set yourself up and thinking about designing your architecture in a way that you can undo what you've done. You can make a twist, turn, or change. But if you don't start, you don't know. Right? It is definitely a journey, which is why I said pick something really small to start with. Don't take the biggest thing you have and make it a 2-year project to get it out the door. Emily knows well we've worked really hard to try to make our stuff super small. And it's a continuous journey, right? To really get it down to a size and scope that you can go deliver. I'd say start small and go from there.
Thank you, Laura. Emily, what about you?
I think actually mine might be along the same lines. So last week I was speaking to the CTO of a Northeast bank that recently announced their selection of Thought Machine. And we were talking about the comparisons of cores and decision-making and integration of Thought Machine into their ecosystem and what that looked like. And all of the decisions that had to be made. And some of them were scary and some of them were unknown, just like Laura was reviewing. And he shared, at some point, Emily, he said, you just have to try it. And that really resonated with me, similar to what Laura said. No decision is wrong. You just need to make a decision. And the lack of decision, especially in this market and how fast things are moving, can be more detrimental. So, if it aligns with your business case and your priorities at this point in time, then sometimes you just have to stop the deliberation and get on board.
I love it. No decision is wrong. You just sometimes make a decision. I think this is my takeaway for the day, the biggest takeaway, right? Something I have to tell myself in many things we do. Not last but not least, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, so a few final thoughts, right? I think everybody realizes the inevitability of adopting the cloud, adopting event-driven architectures, adopting an open source stack. The main issue is that this may seem a mountain, right, with many technical and organizational challenges. So what I would say is, on top of what Emily basically and Laura said, right, go for an incremental approach and ensure you stay curious, ensure you engage with the technology vendors, ensure you engage with your partners, ensure you basically leverage this new workforce of technologies that are very hungry actually to get on board the digital transformation in the financial services space. And I think if you leverage all that and you give your institution enough time, the result will be surprisingly positive.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Emily. And thank you, Emmanuel. Can't believe our time has come to an end. I feel like I can certainly go on this for a much longer time. And there's so much to learn from you all. And love to have you all back at some time in the near future. I'd also appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedule. Particularly, Laura, I know things must be crazy busy for you, and I'm sure it's also exciting at the same time. So certainly want to wish you good best of luck, and I'm sure there will be a lot of successes coming from your way, and I would love to have you back, share with us more, maybe in a few months down the road. And audience, thank you for joining us. I hope you find the session helpful and will join us again. Like I said, if you can stay on for a few more seconds for a very brief survey, we'd very much appreciate your feedback. Now, by now, thank you and see you again. And speakers, if you can stay on for a few minutes, we'll have a post-conference just a regroup. Thank you.